HOA destroyed Grandpa's classic car, so I sued every board member for criminal damage. They crushed my dead grandfather's 1967 Mustang with a bulldozer and they smiled while they did it. My name is Dylan Reyes and this is the story of how one HOA board destroyed the last piece of my grandfather I had left, and how I made every single one of them pay. I live in Maple Crest Estates, a quiet subdivision outside Charlotte, North Carolina, the kind of place with manicured lawns and mailbox regulations. Grandpa Joe left me his Mustang when he passed 2 years ago. It sat under a fitted car cover in my driveway, untouched by rain, dust, or time. I wasn't restoring it yet. I was saving up, working double shifts as a paralegal, waiting for the day I could finally bring it back to life. Every evening I'd walk past that cover and touch it, just to remember his hands on the wheel, his laugh, his voice telling me stories about that car. Then came Karen Whitfield, HOA board president, and her endless obsession with curb appeal. She started leaving notices on my door. Vehicle cover violates aesthetic guidelines. I laughed it off at first. It was just fabric. I never imagined that 6 months later, she'd have that car hauled away and crushed, without a hearing, without a warning, without my consent. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where it all began. I moved into Maple Crest 3 years ago, drawn by the tree-lined streets and the promise of a peaceful neighborhood. I never read the HOA bylaws cover to cover. Nobody does. That was my first mistake. Karen Whitfield had been board president for 11 years. People called her the Queen of Maple Crest, behind her back. She drove a white Cadillac Escalade with a "I Heart Suit My HOA" bumper sticker, like she was advertising her own kingdom. At first she seemed friendly enough, brought me a fruit basket when I moved in, told me she'd keep an eye out for me. I didn't know yet that keeping an eye out meant something closer to surveillance. The neighborhood had strict rules: grass height, mailbox color, holiday light schedules, even approved shades of exterior paint. Most people just complied quietly. Confrontation wasn't worth the headache, they said. I was one of those people, until my grandfather's Mustang came into my life and changed everything. Grandpa Joe restored that car himself in the 80s, cherry red with a black stripe down the hood. He used to say, "A man's car tells you who he was, even after he's gone." When he died, the will named me, not my cousins, not my uncle, as the one who'd inherit it. I promised myself I'd finish what he never got the chance to, a full restoration, driven proudly down Main Street. The first notice came 3 weeks after the Mustang arrived. Remove vehicle cover or face fines. I called the HOA office. A woman named Patricia told me the cover violated dark color paneling restrictions, whatever that meant. I explained the car wasn't running yet, that it was under restoration and covered for protection. Patricia's voice went cold. "Take it up with Karen. She makes the calls around here." That was the first time I heard her name spoken like a warning label. I requested a meeting with the board. Karen agreed, but scheduled it for a Tuesday morning when she knew I'd be at work. I asked to reschedule. She refused, citing board availability constraints. Frustrated, I sent a written appeal instead, explaining the sentimental and financial value of the vehicle. 3 days later, a $50 fine appeared in my mailbox. Then another. Then another. I paid the first 2, hoping it would end the harassment. It didn't. My neighbor, Mrs. Alvarez, warned me quietly one evening while watering her flowers. "Watch yourself with that woman. She doesn't forget a grudge." I laughed it off. "It's just a car cover, right?" Mrs. Alvarez didn't laugh back. "It's never just anything with Karen." That should have told me everything I needed to know. 2 weeks later, Karen showed up at my door personally, clipboard in hand, camera around her neck. "I'm documenting violations for the quarterly report," she said, snapping a photo of my driveway without asking. I told her the car wasn't going anywhere and wasn't hurting anyone. She smiled, that tight, practiced smile, and said, "Rules exist for a reason, Mr. Reyes. Even for people who think they're special." I didn't understand yet that she'd already decided I was her next target. The fines kept coming, climbing from $50 to $200, then to a lien threat on my property. I started keeping every letter, every email, every photo of every notice, filing them away without knowing why yet. Something in my gut told me I'd need it all someday. I began recording our phone calls too, legal under North Carolina's one-party consent law. Little did Karen know, the quiet, exhausted paralegal she was bullying knew exactly how to build a case file. One night I found a torn HOA newsletter in the recycling bin. Board authorizes towing of non-compliant vehicles at owner's expense. My stomach dropped. They were talking about towing power. About my grandfather's car. I called an attorney friend, Marcus, just to ask hypothetically what my rights were. They can't touch a covered, parked vehicle on private property without a court order, he said. That would be destruction of property, plain and simple. I felt relieved. Surely even Karen wouldn't go that far. I was wrong. Dead wrong. 3 days later, I came home from a 12-hour shift to find my driveway empty. No cover. No car. No note. Just tire tracks and a crushed flower bed where the tow truck had turned. I called the HOA office in a panic. Patricia's voice trembled. You'll need to speak with Karen directly. Karen answered on the second ring, sounding almost bored. The vehicle was deemed abandoned and non-compliant. It's been removed per board authority. Removed to where? I shouted, my hands shaking around the phone. There was a pause. Then, it was scrapped, Mr. Reyes. Per Section 14 of the bylaws. Scrapped. Crushed. Gone. My grandfather's Mustang, gone forever, because of a car cover. I stood in my driveway that night and didn't cry. I went numb, the kind of numb that only comes right before something breaks inside you. I called the scrapyard listed on the tow receipt. The manager confirmed it, crushed and sold for parts within 48 hours, per HOA request. 48 hours. Not even time for me to say goodbye. I asked for the paperwork authorizing the tow. He faxed it over without hesitation. He had no idea what he'd just handed me. The form listed abandoned vehicle, non-running, hazard to community as the reason for disposal. Lies. Every word of it. The car ran. I had photos of me starting the engine just 2 weeks earlier. I requested the HOA's official vote record authorizing the tow. Board bylaws required a quorum vote for vehicle removal over $500 in value. Patricia, clearly uneasy, slipped me a copy without Karen's knowledge. I shouldn't do this, she whispered, but this isn't right. The vote record showed only 2 signatures. Karen's and her best friend Diane's. No quorum. No majority. No legal authority. That was the first crack in Karen's armor and she didn't even know it existed yet. I met with Marcus again, this time not hypothetically. I laid every document on his desk. He went quiet reading through it, then looked up. Dylan, this isn't just a civil violation. This could be criminal destruction of property. My heart pounded. Criminal? Against an HOA board? Board members aren't above the law, he said. If they authorize destruction of a $40,000 vehicle without proper vote or notice, that's actionable, maybe even a felony. $40,000. I hadn't even had it appraised, but Marcus was right, restored, it would have been worth every penny. I decided in that moment, I wasn't going to yell, cry, or beg. I was going to build a case so airtight Karen couldn't wriggle free. I requested the HOA's insurance policy documents through a public records request, since our HOA received partial municipal funding for road maintenance. That request alone made Karen furious. She sent me an email demanding to know why I was digging into HOA finances. I didn't respond. Silence, I was learning, unsettled her more than any argument ever could. I started attending every open board meeting, recorder in my pocket, notebook in hand, saying almost nothing. Karen mocked me publicly at the first meeting. "Look who finally decided to participate in his community," she said, and the room chuckled nervously. I smiled and said nothing. Let her think she'd won. After the meeting, an older resident named Frank pulled me aside. She did something similar to the Hendersons 2 years back. Towed a boat that wasn't even on the violation list. Frank still had the paperwork. I asked if I could copy it. He didn't hesitate. A pattern was forming. Karen wasn't a one-time offender. She'd been doing this for years and nobody had ever pushed back hard enough. I started reaching out quietly to other residents who'd had disputes with the board, gathering statements, dates, and documentation. 5 families came forward. 5 stories eerily similar to mine: sudden fines, ignored appeals, abandoned property mysteriously removed. Karen had built a small empire of quiet intimidation, and it had worked for over a decade because no one had ever documented it properly. I had. And I wasn't going to stop. Marcus filed a formal demand letter requesting Karen preserve all records related to my vehicle's removal, citing potential litigation. 2 days later, Patricia called me, voice shaking. She had me shred files today. I photographed some of them before I did it. Patricia was scared, but she was also done being silent. She agreed to be a witness. I realized then that Karen's own arrogance, her belief that no one would ever challenge her, was becoming her greatest weakness. She'd spent so many years unquestioned that she'd stopped covering her tracks carefully. At the next board meeting, I stood up and formally requested the meeting minutes and vote records from the night my car was authorized for removal. Karen's smile faltered for just a second before she recovered. "Those records are being reviewed for accuracy," she said. Reviewed for accuracy. Translation: she was scrambling to fabricate a paper trail after the fact. I already had the original, unaltered copy Patricia had given me weeks before. Marcus filed a small claims suit first, a strategic opening move, for the value of the vehicle and property damage. Karen was formally served papers on a Thursday afternoon, right in front of her Cadillac, right in front of her neighbors. Word spread through the neighborhood within hours. For the first time, people were whispering about Karen instead of about me. She tried to spin it at the next meeting, calling it a misunderstanding being blown out of proportion by a disgruntled resident. But Frank stood up. Then Mrs. Alvarez. Then 2 more residents, each sharing their own story of unfair treatment. Karen's face went pale as the room turned against her in real time. "This meeting is adjourned," she snapped, banging the gavel and storming out before questions could continue. That night, I got a call from a local news reporter, Sandra Kim, who'd heard about the growing resident complaints. I hesitated. Going public meant no turning back. But then I thought of Grandpa Joe and I said yes. Sandra's team began digging into HOA public records, financial disclosures, and vendor contracts. What they found shocked even me. The scrapyard that crushed my car was owned by Karen's brother-in-law. Karen hadn't just violated procedure, she'd profited from destroying my grandfather's car, paid a removal fee that went straight into family hands. That was twist number 1, and it changed everything. This wasn't overreach. This was fraud. Marcus amended the lawsuit immediately, adding claims of conflict of interest, self-dealing, and breach of fiduciary duty. Karen tried to counter by claiming the scrapyard contract predated her brother-in-law's ownership. A quick records search proved that false too. Every lie she told added another shovel of dirt to the hole she was digging herself into. The HOA's insurance company, upon learning of the fraud allegations, launched their own internal investigation. Karen's allies on the board, people who'd rubber-stamped her decisions for years, started distancing themselves fast. Diane, her closest ally, suddenly claimed she didn't recall voting to authorize the tow. Rats leaving a sinking ship. I almost felt sorry for Karen. Almost. Sandra's news segment aired on a Friday evening. HOA president accused of fraud after crushing residents' inherited classic car. By Monday, the story had been picked up by 3 other local stations and shared thousands of times online. Karen tried damage control, posting a statement on the community Facebook group calling the accusations malicious and misleading. The comments section turned into a graveyard of her own past victims, each one sharing a story she thought had been long buried. A woman named Teresa wrote about her wheelchair ramp being cited as unsightly and forcibly removed while her elderly mother lived there. A man named Curtis shared how Karen fined him for a rainbow flag, calling it a seasonal decoration violation, then quietly dropped it when a lawyer got involved. Story after story surfaced, each one small on its own, but together painting the portrait of a woman who mistook her position for a throne. I sat back and let the community do what I never could have alone, expose the pattern in its full, ugly shape. Karen requested an emergency closed-door board meeting, members only, clearly hoping to control the narrative before I could respond. Patricia, still quietly on my side, texted me the time and agenda anyway. I couldn't attend, but Marcus could, in his capacity as my legal representative, demanding transparency under the HOA's own bylaws. Karen tried to block him from entering. He simply read aloud the exact bylaw clause requiring open meetings for matters involving pending litigation. She had no choice but to let him in, fury barely concealed behind her painted smile. Inside, according to Patricia's notes, Karen tried to pin the entire scandal on clerical errors and miscommunication with vendors. Marcus calmly placed copies of the shredded documents Patricia had photographed on the table. The room went silent. "These aren't clerical errors," he said. "This is a documented pattern of unauthorized property destruction and financial self-dealing." Karen demanded to know who leaked the documents. Patricia, sitting right there, didn't flinch, didn't look away. That was the moment Karen realized her own hand-picked assistant had turned against her. The board, sensing the ship going down, voted, a real quorum this time, to suspend Karen pending investigation. She stormed out for the second time in a month, this time without her usual parting insult. I thought that would be the end of it. It wasn't. Karen wasn't done fighting, not by a long shot. She hired her own attorney and filed a countersuit against me, claiming defamation and harassment. My stomach twisted reading the filing. Was she really going to try to spin herself as the victim? Marcus wasn't worried. "This is desperation," he said. "She's trying to bury you in legal fees so you'll drop everything." He was right. That's exactly the game she was playing, grind me down until I couldn't afford to keep fighting. For a week, I genuinely considered settling, just to make the stress stop. Legal bills were piling up fast. Then Frank showed up at my door with an envelope. Inside was $3,000, collected from neighbors who wanted to help. "We're in this together now," he said. "She's hurt too many of us for too long." That night I decided, I wasn't backing down. Not for Grandpa Joe and not for every neighbor she'd silenced before me. Marcus filed a motion to dismiss Karen's countersuit, citing it as a retaliatory SLAPP suit designed to silence a whistleblower. North Carolina's anti-SLAPP protections, though limited, gave us just enough ground to argue bad faith. The judge scheduled a hearing and for the first time, Karen would have to explain herself under oath, in a courtroom, with no gavel to bang and no meeting to storm out of. The morning of the hearing, I wore my grandfather's old watch, the one thing of his I always carried for luck. Karen arrived in a sharp navy suit, looking every bit the composed executive she believed herself to be. Her composure lasted exactly until Marcus called Patricia to the stand. Patricia testified calmly about the shredded documents, the missing quorum and Karen's explicit instruction to make the paperwork match the story. Karen's attorney objected repeatedly, but the damage was already sinking in with the judge. Then Marcus called the scrapyard manager, who confirmed under oath that Karen had personally called ahead to expedite the crushing before anyone could stop it. Before anyone could stop it. His own words, spoken on a recorded call Marcus had subpoenaed. Karen tried to explain it away as standard procedure. The judge's raised eyebrow said otherwise. Twist number 2 landed then. The scrapyard manager revealed Karen had asked him to backdate the disposal paperwork by 2 days. Backdating documents to cover an illegal seizure. That wasn't just a civil violation anymore. That was outright fraud. The judge dismissed Karen's countersuit on the spot, calling it a transparent attempt to intimidate a legitimate plaintiff. Karen's face went the color of chalk. For the first time since I'd known her, she had nothing to say. Outside the courthouse, Sandra Kim was waiting with her camera crew and Karen pushed past without comment, sunglasses hiding whatever was left of her composure. I stood on the courthouse steps and finally allowed myself a small, tired smile. This wasn't over, but the tide had turned. That evening, Mrs. Alvarez brought over a pie, unprompted, for Grandpa Joe, she said. I nearly broke down right there on my porch. Word came a few days later. The county was opening a criminal investigation into HOA fund misuse, prompted by evidence from our civil case. Karen's brother-in-law's scrapyard was subpoenaed for financial records tying years of vehicle removal fees back to her family. Turns out my Mustang wasn't the first car that scrapyard had crushed on Karen's orders. It was the ninth. 9 families, 9 cars, thousands of dollars funneled quietly through a fake community beautification fund Karen had created and controlled alone. That was twist number 3. This was never really about rules or curb appeal. It was a slow-burning financial scheme hiding behind a clipboard and a smile. Detectives began interviewing former board members, several of whom admitted they'd suspected something but were too intimidated to speak up. One former treasurer, a soft-spoken man named Elliot, handed over years of ledgers he'd secretly kept copies of, afraid of exactly this day. The fund, meant for community landscaping, had over $180,000 unaccounted for across 6 years. Karen had used HOA authority not just to control her neighbors' lives, but to quietly enrich her own family the entire time. I remember reading the county's press release with shaking hands: grand theft, fraud and malicious destruction of property, HOA president charged. Charged. Actual criminal charges. Not fines. Not lawsuits. Handcuffs. The community Facebook group, once carefully moderated by Karen herself, exploded with disbelief, vindication and no small amount of schadenfreude. Diane resigned from the board the same day, releasing a statement claiming she'd always had concerns, a claim nobody in the neighborhood believed for a second. I felt something in my chest loosen for the first time in months. Not joy exactly. Something closer to relief. But there was still the civil case to finish, my case, the one that started this entire unraveling in the first place. Marcus and I met to finalize our strategy for the civil trial, now bolstered by the weight of the criminal investigation running in parallel. We're not just asking for the value of the car anymore, he said. We're asking for punitive damages. She needs to feel this. I agreed. This was no longer about money. It was about making sure no one else's grandfather's memory could be crushed so carelessly. Karen's own attorney quietly withdrew from her case 2 weeks before trial, citing irreconcilable differences, a nice way of saying he saw the writing on the wall. She scrambled for new representation, but word travels fast among local lawyers and few wanted their name attached to hers now. The criminal case moved faster than expected, given the volume of evidence Elliot and Patricia had provided. Karen was arraigned on multiple felony counts: embezzlement, fraud and malicious destruction of property exceeding $10,000 in value. She pleaded not guilty, of course, standing stiff and proud even as the courtroom murmured around her. Bail was set. Her Cadillac, ironically, became one of the assets flagged for potential seizure pending trial. I never thought I'd feel satisfaction watching someone's SUV get flagged, but grief does strange things to a person's sense of justice. My civil trial date arrived on a crisp autumn morning, 6 months after that empty driveway had first broken my heart. I brought photographs of Grandpa Joe standing beside the Mustang the day he finished restoring it in 1989, framed and ready for the jury. Karen's new attorney tried one last desperate angle, arguing the car's value was inflated, that it was just an old car, barely worth a few $1,000s. Marcus called an independent classic car appraiser who testified the Mustang, fully restored, would have been worth $38,000 to $45,000. Then Marcus asked me directly, in front of the jury, what the car actually meant to me. I talked about Grandpa Joe teaching me to check the oil when I was 9, about Sunday drives with the windows down and his old records playing. I talked about how I never got to say goodbye to the last piece of him I had left, because someone decided a car cover was worth more than my grief. There wasn't a dry eye left in that jury box by the time I finished. Karen was called to testify. Her composed mask cracked for the first time in public, under Marcus's relentless, precise questioning. "Did you personally call the scrapyard to expedite the crushing?" Marcus asked. She hesitated. "I don't recall the exact wording." Marcus played the recorded call. Her own voice, clear as day, "Get it crushed today. I don't want this dragging on." The jury's expressions hardened in unison. There was no spinning that recording. Then came twist number 4, the one I hadn't even known about until that moment. Marcus revealed that Karen had specifically targeted my property after I'd declined to hire her cousin's landscaping company the year before. This had never been about curb appeal at all. It was personal, petty retaliation dressed up in bylaws and clipboards. Karen's face crumbled as the courtroom absorbed the pettiness of what had cost me everything. Closing arguments were brief. The evidence had already told the story better than any lawyer could. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours before returning a verdict entirely in my favor. Compensatory damages for the vehicle's value. Additional damages for emotional distress. And on top of it all, punitive damages for malicious conduct. The final judgment, $312,000. More money than I'd ever imagined, though no amount could truly replace Grandpa Joe's Mustang. Karen sat frozen at the defense table as the number was read aloud, her carefully built empire finally, publicly, crumbling to dust. Outside the courthouse, neighbors who'd once been too afraid to speak up now surrounded me, some crying, some laughing, all of them relieved. Mrs. Alvarez hugged me so tight I nearly dropped my folder of paperwork. "You did it for all of us," she whispered. "I hadn't set out to be anyone's hero. I just wanted justice for my grandfather. But maybe that's how real change always starts." 2 months later, Karen's criminal trial began and the same evidence that won my civil case became the backbone of the prosecution. Elliot's ledgers, Patricia's photographs, the scrapyard manager's testimony, all of it laid out again, this time with the state as plaintiff. The jury took even less time this round. Guilty on all counts, embezzlement, fraud and malicious destruction of property. Karen was sentenced to 4 years in state prison, along with a permanent ban from serving on any homeowners association board in North Carolina. Her brother-in-law's scrapyard lost its operating license after the investigation revealed years of falsified disposal records. Diane, though never criminally charged, was formally removed from any future HOA leadership role by unanimous community vote. The Maple Crest HOA elected an entirely new board within weeks, this time with strict transparency rules written directly into the bylaws. Patricia, of all people, was nominated and elected as the new board secretary, this time with the power to actually protect residents instead of silencing them. Frank became the new board president, immediately reversing years of unjust fines and creating a formal appeals process for every resident. I used part of the settlement to help other victims of Karen's scheme file their own claims against the fraudulent beautification fund. Teresa got her mother's wheelchair ramp rebuilt, this time permanently protected under updated accessibility bylaws. Curtis's rainbow flag now flies year-round on his porch, a small, quiet act of defiance turned into simple, unremarkable normal life. I never got my grandfather's actual Mustang back. Nothing could undo that crushing metal, that irreversible loss. But with part of the settlement, I found another 1967 Mustang, same color, same year, sitting in a barn 2 counties over. It wasn't his car. It would never be his car. But I began restoring it exactly the way he would have, piece by piece, weekend by weekend. Some nights, working under the garage light, I swear I can still hear him telling me to check the timing belt twice. The community held a small gathering last spring, an unofficial Founders' Day, celebrating the neighborhood's fresh start under honest leadership. Someone suggested naming the newly renovated community garden after my grandfather, since his story had indirectly sparked the whole reform. Joe Reyes Memorial Garden now sits where the old HOA office used to stand, a quiet, permanent rebuke to everything Karen had built. I visit it sometimes, sit on the bench there and think about how something so cruel eventually became something good for so many people. Karen writes letters occasionally from prison, always claiming she never meant for things to go this far. I never respond. Some debts aren't meant to be repaid with words. Hers is being repaid 1 year at a time, behind a locked door she built for herself. I finished restoring the new Mustang last month. Cherry red, black stripe down the hood, exactly like Grandpa Joe's. I drove it slowly down Main Street on a Sunday afternoon, windows down, his favorite record playing from a small speaker on the dash. Justice didn't bring my grandfather's car back. But it brought back something else, the sense that his memory mattered, that it was worth fighting for. And every time that engine turns over, I know somewhere, Grandpa Joe is smiling, because his grandson finally learned to fight the way he taught him to.